Everybody, welcome to Oligopoly chapter. Technically, it's the imperfect competition chapter because we do a little bit of monopolistic competition, but it's basically the oligopoly chapter. So, let's talk about it. This is new, right? The last couple weeks, we learned about perfect competition, we learned about monopoly. Those were mostly review plus math. And then we had the pricing strategies chapter, which we've never done that before in my classes, but it's still just like, what do you do with market power? It still feels like monopoly. This chapter, we break everything and change the way we think about it. So let's give a little primer on this. Funny story here, based on Southwest Airlines. You might notice that there is a lady there giving a bottle of liquor to a man. Why do I share that picture? So, a little bit of a story. If you want a much more thorough version of the story, check out the Business Wars podcast. They have some episodes about Southwest Airline, and it's pretty fascinating. But long story short, long ago, Southwest Airlines was a startup company, and American Airlines wanted to crush them. Southwest Airlines only operated between Austin, Dallas, and Houston. Just the three cities in Texas. It was basically a business commuting airline. And American Airlines was this huge airline that was nationwide, basically. And they wanted to keep their market power. So it's not a perfect monopoly scenario, right? American Airlines isn't even the only airline that Southwest is bumping into. There are several others in existence, and Southwest is entering. We have a market with a few big players, but more than one, and less than a ton. So in perfect competition, we assume that no one has any control over price. Well, let's break that. American Airlines, feeling Southwest crunching in on three of their routes, decides we are going to push them out of this market. And the way they did that is by lowering the price of their tickets on those three pathways between Austin and Houston, between Houston and and Dallas, and between Dallas and Austin. So that little triangle, American Airlines dropped its fees on those routes. Why? To get Southwest out. Now, we don't know all the details, but let me paint a picture of what this could have looked like. They could have been saying, hey, we're going to sell these tickets at a small loss, and we're a huge company. The extra money from all of our other routes can subsidize these losses. And our hope is that by doing this, we can keep this route as a monopoly. Right? If we price Southwest out of the market and Southwest goes bankrupt, we stay a monopoly. That's something called entry deterrence. We're not going to talk about it a ton, but it's pretty fascinating stuff. It's a branch off of the Stackelberg model, which we will be doing this chapter. Yeah. Anyway, Southwest suddenly finds themselves in a very bad situation. They only have three routes, they only have a few planes, and one of the biggest airlines in the world is trying to squish them out of existence. How do you compete with that big money? You got to start thinking very strategically. So Southwest did two things, really. One of them, American Airlines could not legally duplicate, and that's behind me, the booze. See, American Airlines crosses state lines, and so it was subject to federal regulations. Southwest Airlines was only in Texas. It did not cross state lines, and so it was not subject to federal regulation. So, even though they couldn't match American Airlines on price, not while staying in business, what they did was they started offering liquor, lots of it, They were for a while, they were the largest purchaser of liquor in the state of Texas, just to serve these three routes. And they're like, hey, our customers are all business customers at the time. None of these people are actually paying for their own ticket. They're like charging it to some business expense account. And so, and let me get this quote over here. The idea nobody's going to shoot Southwest Airlines out of the sky for a lousy $13. They're like, look, these people are beating us by that much. We can't match it and stay in business. But if we give you a bunch of booze, you'll just buy a ticket from us and bill your company for that one. And most people aren't going to think twice about it. And it worked. It kept them in business. The other thing they did was perhaps a little bit more sexist, if you want to call it that, which was they made a name for themselves, having their flight attendants all being young, attractive women in very small shorts and the like. So that also was another form of product differentiation that they provided to all their 1970s business customers. Yep. So that also probably helped them stay in business. I'm not making a cultural statement about what they should or shouldn't do, or if that would get them whatever kind of attention in 2022. But in 1970s, it worked well. So let's see. A few things we can talk about in this story. One is that these two companies, when competing with each other, have to think about what the other one's going to do. Southwest knows, you know what, if we try to match them on price, they'll just bump it below us anyway. They have a national airline that can subsidize this route. We cannot beat them in a price war. So we have to do a better response than just lowering our price to match them. We have to do something else. We have a picture of American Airlines lowering the price to take a larger market share. We also have Southwest Airlines learning lessons on product differentiation. They know their market, and they found two ways to appeal to it. All these tired business customers on their way home after a long trip for whatever, they want to get hammered. And also, all these tired businessmen, at least enough of them appreciated the flight attendant differences between their airline and others. I don't know. And so let's return to what oligopoly is. Oligopoly is when there's more than one firm, so there is competition, but there are few enough firms that that competition is imperfect. Okay, chapter 8 was perfect competition. Well, now we're doing imperfect competition. There's firms, but not too many. And so they all have market power, but they also all compete with each other. And they can take each other's market power if they strategically act in a certain way. This stuff is my favorite, like big time. When I got my PhD in economics, one of my two fields, my specializations, was industrial organization, which is basically this chapter and last chapter. It's the study of market power and imperfect competition. This stuff I just love it. I think it's fascinating, and I think it's far more interesting than either the monopoly or the perfect competition chapter, because what we're going to do in this chapter is pointing at real stuff. In the perfect competition and monopoly, I say, hey, you know, this model, it's pretty rare that you'd ever actually see this in real life, but it helps us learn lessons anyway. That's true. These ones, they get closer to real life. They're not going to be all the way there, but they're closer. Unfortunately, the more realistic you make it, the more mathematical it gets. This chapter gets kind of intense. I apologize for that. But yeah, the results I think are far more interesting. Some general ideas. The more concentrated the market power is in an industry, the closer it's going to be to acting like a monopoly. The more firms there are, the more competition there is, the closer it'll be to being like perfect competition. So remember, there was like a perfectly competitive quantity and there was a monopoly quantity. There's a gap between, creating a deadweight loss. Well, we're going to end up between one of those quantities. The more market power, the more the deadweight loss. Let's see. Yeah, so I have videos on the Cournot model, the Stackelberg model, the Bertrand model. Cournot and Stackelberg are two peas in a pod. One of them is two firms duking it out currently, like they're both already in the market, so they fight each other. And they do it by first choosing quantities. Yeah, how much to flood the market with your good. The Stackelberg model is a little closer to the American Airlines versus Southwest scenario. One firm is already there and gets to move first, and then the entrant, or the second firm, gets to go against them. So one starts at a disadvantage while the other has a first mover advantage. But again, it's also a quantity discussion. Like the first choice for both Cournot and Stackelberg is quantity. There is Bertrand, which is a price war, price competition, where the primary method is dropping price, which, let's be honest, that's a little bit kind of what American Airlines was doing. They were trying to do a price war. So these things kind of bleed over into each other. I mean, if you choose higher quantities, that's going to lead to lower prices. And if you choose lower prices, people are going to want to buy higher quantities. So there's overlap. These aren't necessarily distinct, all or nothing has to be one category or another. These are different frameworks for analyzing competition. There'll even be a chance for, I think we cover it in this class, product differentiated Bertrand. It's a price war, but it's more like, but it's cooler. Because the basic Bertrand model assumes that everyone's selling the same good, and the product differentiated Bertrand model does not. It allows them to sell different goods from each other, but they're still substitutable. So that leads me to the next part about oligopoly, which is not only are there fewer firms, but they may or may not sell an identical good. Right? When there's only a couple of firms, how did Southwest survive? It wasn't by matching on price or by matching on the, some sort of productive efficiency sort of. No, they did it by offering booze and girls. Right? They differentiated their product, and it worked. So that's a really relevant thing. Now, in our models that we're doing in this chapter, we're not going to be able to measure or like have the model predict new forms of differentiation. Right? That's a little beyond, that's like what's happening outside of the math. But once a firm makes a strategic decision, then our equations are set, if you want to think of it that way. And once we've made our product offering decisions and stuff like that, everything is set. And so then we compete, which is where our models pick up. Yeah, let me briefly just share a couple more examples of oligopoly. Let me change my picture back here. Oh, I did have a picture of all the flight attendants, but whatever. I don't need to be flashing that up here anyway, So here's another picture I think is interesting. You might notice that in the world of food, we got Kraft, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, General Mills, Johnson & Johnson, Kellogg's, Mars, and Unilever. Those 10 companies basically stock your entire grocery store. I mean, not literally, there are some other stuff, but just look around. Pause the video if you want to. Look at all these different products. And know that everything on there is from 10 companies. Now, if you want to zoom in, I can't do it with this picture, but if you were to like zoom in on breakfast cereals, there's basically 4 companies involved. 4 companies are going to be like 90 something percent of the market. And there's going to be like a bunch of little fringy small companies on the side, usually selling something crunchy that tastes like tree bark, right? So another example is, or another topic we need to cover briefly, is that of collusion. Collusion means to team up, to work together in some way. And when there's only a couple of companies dominating a market, there's going to be temptation for these companies to hide from competition and team up with each other to get more money out of you and me. So speaking of airlines, there was one where one airline CEO calls another and says, hey, this price war is killing us. What do you say we both raise our prices by 25%? And the one CEO says to the other, like, dude, we can't talk about this, and hangs up on him. Does that kind of stuff actually happen? It does. That was a real story. You can look it up if you want to. There's another one. I'm going to put a link in the video description for a little 6-minute YouTube video, which is pretty interesting. There was a cartel, which is a group of colluding firms. I think that's what it means in this class. A cartel is someone who's teamed up illegally, basically. And between these few firms, they basically owned the entire world market for a food additive, a protein called lysine. They add it into food, and the livestock eat it, and it helps them grow big, strong, and fat. Makes lots of meat, which then you can go bring to the store. Or it makes them go strong, so the chickens can lay lots of eggs, so you can go sell those at the store. So it's just a food additive. But these few companies owned most of the world supply of it. And history is going to tell us that they teamed up and that they basically like met up in a smoke-filled hotel room. I kid you not. It's like cartoonish how like cliche it is. They have video, which is in that video I'm going to post in the description, of these guys meeting in a smoke-filled hotel room and basically dividing up the world market, saying you get to go here, I get to go here. So we all get to act like monopolies in our playgrounds. And one of them is even saying to his buddies or to his associates, he says, the customer is not my friend. The customer, he says something like, customer is not my friend. You guys are my friends because you guys are going to help me make more money. So let me just end by saying that is exceptionally illegal. Businesses are not allowed to team up against consumers. They're supposed to compete. And our antitrust laws that protect us from monopolies also protect us from cartels, or at least they try to. The problem is it's very hard to enforce laws like that. Because businesses, I don't know, are they always going to meet in a smoke-filled hotel room to divide up prices while one of them's an informant and has a bug on them for the FBI? No, that's not usually how it works. And they can also find other ways to legally collude, sort of. Let me give an example. If a large company promises a price matching deal, like whatever the other guy has, bring me their price and we'll match it. That's not explicitly colluding with each other. And so it's not illegal. It's totally legal. It's fine. But it kind of has the same effect. What incentive do you have to sell your goods for a good deal if it's not going to help you corner the market? If you try to sell for less than their price, they'll just match you. There's no point. And that has a tendency to make it so there's less downward pressure on prices. It lessens the competition. Because wouldn't you both rather just do a higher price if you're selling good stuff? Yeah. So there's going to be other workarounds besides that. That's just one that comes to my mind. That's not collusion, but stuff like that makes it hard to detect collusion, right? It's hard to look at two companies and say, hey, we know there's something illegal going on, when there's so many different pricing schemes and strategies and all kinds of other stuff. It's just hard to measure, it's hard to catch, it's hard to prove. Um, but it is something to watch out for. So, in our technical videos this week, we're going to learn about how to solve a Cournot competition model, how to compare it with a collusion model. By the way, our version of collusion is basically just going to be solve for the monopoly quantity and price, and then divide up the quantity like they're splitting the market. That's how we're going to model that. But everything else should be fairly new. There's going to be something called best response functions. We'll talk about those in the videos. I think it's probably a pretty good intro. You should watch that 6-minute video link. I think actually I'll just put it in the playlist. I'll do both, but I think it's interesting. It's kind of an interesting video. There was another collusion thing a couple years ago with a bunch of generic pharmaceutical manufacturers, like they're like making the cheap alternatives to the name brand drugs, but they were price fixing also, making several percentage, like 20 or something percent markup, or I don't know. They were fixing though and making a markup. It happens. It's bad though. Bad in the sense of it's illegal and it's bad for customers. Anyway, guys, this is a cool chapter. It's a hard one, but yeah, that's okay. I hope this video is helpful to get kind of an overview grasp of it, and I hope the technical videos help with the details. Peace out.